Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 598 of Russian war with Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexey Arestovych, Nikolay Feldman, Ukrainian journalist, and Yuriy Romanenko, one of the authors and founders of Alpha&Omega channel. Our usual thanks go to our pillars of support, Class Predators and Bill. Thank you guys for sticking with us and for helping us to do this work. And with this, let's go to day 598, where a good chunk of attention is still on Israel, with the events unfolding there. They also will discuss possible strategy for the coalition, problems of Black Sea Fleet in Russia, and Ukrainian army strategy, as well as the other events. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. This is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolay Feldman. We're watching War Diary with Alexey Arestovych, day 598, October 14th. Alexey is already connected to our studio. Yuri is also online. Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. All right, the main news, let's take for today preparation or completion of preparatory operations of Israeli ground forces for the operation in Gaza sector. Israeli army is conducting massive airstrikes on the Gaza territory, on the military targets. They've reported about successful liquidation of one of the authors of the attack on Israel. One of the top military leaders of Hamas is also no more. So there are some questions related to this ground effort. How do you think we can call these airstrikes? How selective are they? How do we differentiate genocide from the attacks that they're doing on Israel now? There is a metaphoric, not exactly a mathematical, but a calculation we can bring here. Israeli Air Force dropped 4,000 tons of munitions on Gaza sector during this time. Dresden was also bombed, roughly with about the same amount of tonnage of bombs-wise. In Dresden, however, historians report from 25 to 100,000 citizens died, while in the Gaza sector, up to 2,000. So, do you think they're selecting targets or not? In my opinion, yeah, they do, of course. It sounds like they definitely do. And we don't have all the details about casualties in Gaza, but I think we understand what is happening. It is, of course, a tragedy. And there is only one thing you can do here is to minimize the damage, minimize the amount of pain Israel will inflict, and provide good information politics, information support to why they're doing that. But in Israel's owner, they're actually very selective in bombing the Gaza sector. You understand, when they have to bomb civilian quarters or town quarters, they have to destroy military objects within very densely populated quarters. It's, of course, civilians will suffer. There'll be casualties. Israeli army, however, did warn them, all civilians, please leave the cities where the attacks are going to be carried out. And they extended this time frame for another 6 hours, allowing civilians to leave. According to observers, about 800,000 of citizens have started their motion towards the south from the north of Gaza sector, going to Rafah transit point to Egypt. And I already mentioned that I would be sending that message daily, not once or twice, but just keep sending it daily and regularly every hour, creating, by the way, a whole storyline of warnings and finally getting through to some people that they need to evacuate, they need to move. There is a problem there, by the way. Yes, Yuri. Here's the thing that we've heard. Hamas is trying to prevent civilians from leaving their apartments and their houses, because they're using them as live shields, and they're creating certain block posts on the road, making it difficult for civilians to leave their areas of habitation. Yeah, indeed, they are using civilians as live shield, and they're using also little Jewish kids as shield. There are actually some videos online where you can see some of these Hamas fighters holding Israeli infants that they somehow acquired and telling Israeli army that, yeah, don't come here, otherwise your kids will die. Unfortunately, humanity have not invented the bomb that chases just the bad guys, just the terrorists. And you still have to destroy such a terrorist, and if he's using civilians as a shield, then yes, there likely will be casualties in this case. Alex, do you agree with the theory Drusev voiced yesterday that Israel is now in a very predictable scenario, that all these steps have been calculated in advance? The casualties and collateral damage that will be related to Israeli conducting their operations in the Gaza sector, they will be used in the media sphere by Hamas and everybody else who will want to, including Iran, to send these images of suffering Palestinians in the global media. And for Israel, it creates a very serious consideration. Do they enter? When do they enter? How do they enter the Gaza sector? But I have a question, Yuri. What choice do they have? Do not enter? Then the attacks on Israel will repeat once again. Missile strikes and murders of civilians will continue. The war is always a choice between very bad and very, very, very bad. There are no good choices at war. They have to choose between deaths of their children and the children of Gaza, between thousands of missiles aiming and flying towards their towns and cities, and coming or not coming into the Gaza sector with their military. So either another 10 or 15 years of terror or a difficult month of war with Hamas. As for scary pictures, these scary pictures were circulating for the last 70 years, right? And in regards to accusing Jews and all the earthly sins, those images are being circulated in the civilization for the last 2,000 years, I guess. And it's a problem of how you put the question here, the question of war. If Jews lose, they're done with. They are killed. They don't have a choice, really. Arabs, if they stop fighting, if Palestinians stop fighting, or if they disperse between the 19 other Arabic countries, the war will be over. But it is a tragedy anyway, because they have to make these difficult decisions and enter the Gaza sector. It doesn't matter if it's an Arabic or Jewish kid that dies. Israelis don't really have a choice. As for European pressure, it keeps being exercised on Israel. All the Israeli military are being accused and they're under threat of prosecution. So whenever they leave Israel, there are chances that some organizations might prosecute them. It even goes to that some Jewish organizations in America, they collect money for Palestine and they accuse Israel. It's a difficult story. Society is very divided on that matter. And unfortunately, Israel doesn't really have much choice. They generally just have to execute that process. Yeah, by the way, Alexei, Moscow is supporting Hamas. They've made official statements and did some symbolic actions. And Hamas reciprocated on Putin's position as well, sending a message that they do value the position of Russian President Putin in regards to Zionist foes of our people and their attacks on Gaza and Gaza civilians. And here we have a question. Open support of Hamas by Putin. Do you think that leads us to an understanding that all these terrorists, they try to join together, in essence, to fight democracies versus dictatorships and terrorism? Yeah, there definitely is that process happening. And Alexei, what method do you think open democracies can use to resist that? What should be our response? I think, Nikolai, we should use a collective strategy that is equal, that is reflective of the current tasks at hand. We need to be making decisions that are valid for taking care of issues that arise in front of us. We now need to consider that there is an axis of evil, right? It wasn't well defined before, now it is. North Korea, Tehran, Moscow, Damascus, and somewhere in the distance, Beijing, it's the same story. The front may be on Taiwan, the front line may go through Gaza Strip, it can go through Lebanon, through Syria, through Caucasus Mountains, or it can go through Ukraine and at the border with Poland and Lithuania. This is the same front line, in essence. It is basically a fight between two different systems. Which one is more viable? One is very suppressive of its people, the other bets on freedom and development. And all this squabble against who was where first, who was first to settle Palestine, and in general, that's just a backdrop of the fight of these two systems. Putin yesterday managed to talk himself into a corner by comparing Israel's encirclement of Gaza to Hitler blockade of Leningrad during the Second World War. So after these talks, basically Israel's army was compared with Wehrmacht, with Hitler's SS troops, comparing Israelis who lost a lot of their own people, millions of people during the Holocaust and Second World War. And Hamas, by the way, actually killed a 90-year-old grandma during this attack who survived through Holocaust in Europe during the Second World War and only to be killed later by Hamas. And all these atrocities and barbarism done by Hamas when they kill civilians, when they kill infants and women. So one needs to understand that we cannot lose. If South Korea would lose to North Korea, if Taiwan would lose to China, if Azerbaijan would lose to Iran, if Israel will lose to Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, if we will lose to Putin's Russia, if Europe will lose to Putin's Russia, I think people start to understand what will happen, or so I hope. There are some people who don't even try to understand, but I think we understand pretty well. All right, Alexey, look, yesterday in a stream with Andrusev, he is actually a very strong stream, we came to an interesting point that it is rather obvious that this authoritative axis of Iran, Russia, North Korea, and China that is also there, they generally lead by a organized or coordinated strategy. They have ideas, they have logic that they rely upon. And in general, for the collective West, it is time to also try to go to collective actions, because you cannot win coalition without having your own coalition. Because everything that's happening was viewed on the West, at least till this Israeli case, was seen as some individual flashes here and there. The case of Ukraine, the case of Niger, when France was basically kicked out of Africa. And now the situation here in Israel. But if you start to get these puzzle pieces together, you see that all these events have a certain logic that connects them. And the actors there, they have a logical steps that follow into each other's footsteps. So I would say Ukraine probably needs to coordinate better with Israel, because we have things to show and things to share. Israel actually missed the first few days of this war, the information component. Your experience and our experience would be invaluable there. They've slept through all the things that were happening on our front. And drone attacks on the Merkava tanks is a good example of that. I saw the videos and pictures today, how they're standing in columns on the border with Gaza, and that reminds me very well how Russians entered Ukraine on the 24th of February. So Ukraine definitely has lessons to offer to Israel, to share with. And Israel has certain technologies that they could also bring to the table to make beneficial use for the front here. And just like we mentioned that United States have enough resources to help both Israel and Ukraine at the same time, so it's probably a good time for us to also come out with initiatives to coordinate and unite, and the general logic of actions against the authoritarian coalition. We actually are in the ideal position indeed, Yuri. I think we can name all three items that would be important for the coalition, for our coalition, and that already are present in the evil coalition. So they have planning. Budanov mentioned that Russians relocated one of their satellites to the better orbit. They exchange technology because Russia is supplying certain munitions to shoot at Israeli tanks, and Iran is helping sides, and also financing and media support. They do coordinate with each other. There are some news that Hamas got $93 million through a crypto exchange, crypto stock, which is located in Moscow. So this is direct financing of terrorism. Right. Global West definitely has a challenge thrown at them. And Global West has a choice. I'm including here the East as well, Korea and Taiwan, South Korea and Taiwan. So Global West can pretend that there is nothing like that this challenge doesn't exist. Our work is to keep reminding them that, to bring it on their radar to those people who are so-called deep state of the West countries. We need to keep bringing up to their attention that this is real. This axis of evil exists, and they're actively cooperating. And we need to make sure this coalition starts to take shape on our side, and to convince them to work together. When I'll see that Israeli special forces are fighting shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainian forces, and perhaps some representatives of the United States as well, then when I'll see that we are indeed working together. Because, by the way, our special forces are fighting, carrying out some operations in Africa. It's not a secret anymore. There were some publications. So we are bringing good to oppose, in opposing PMC Wagner in Africa. That our special forces were invited to kick some of the Wagner-S out of the countries where they occupied resources. And we need to be more organized, because we see how they generally coordinate already on the Hamas and Russia and Iran side, because from the way they invaded, from the drones, there were several hundreds of those used on the first day of the war with Israel. They destroyed a lot of observation cameras, they destroyed equipment, and it's very specific skill. You need to train it specifically somewhere. So these people were trained somewhere, right? They did not appear out of the blue. And of course, using Shahids on Ukraine, Iranian joining there. So the West is still reluctant to wake up on the level of politicians, because coming out and telling your populace that we have a new war that is spreading to the better half of the world is not what Western politicians dream about. And normal Europeans don't really want to hear that too. So it takes a while to listen for them to get their attention. But the efforts are still being made, and the axis of evil are actively doing that too. For example, they killed in a knife attack a teacher in France, right? And the West seems to be slowly waking up. In Britain, they already told that they will be expelling any of refugees who supports Hamas. They usually have pretty tough social protections, but they said they will be sending them out. Any supporters of Hamas. In France, they were very strict in dispelling pro-Palestinian demonstration. And Lebanese ex-porn star Mia Khalifa was kicked out of Playboy. In Harvard, they're also looking for the lists of students. They want to see names of those who signed pro-Palestinian resolution. So the West starts to react a little better than I even would hope them to react. But, there are other people too, like the Pink Floyd lead singer who came with a Palestinian flag. So this war, this front line doesn't go only between the countries and the actual front lines. That front line goes also between people and families. We have two fronts we are fighting with in Ukraine. We're fighting one, trying to stop the certain authoritarian aspects here, and we're also fighting the hot war in the east with Russia. And there are different wars, civil type, ideological type wars happening in Israel, happening in the West, happening in America. In Israel, some people are thinking we'll lose Israel if we don't use force. Other people are coming out with protests saying, no, if we use too much force, we will cease to exist as well. So, do you know that there were actually several Israeli Arabs who were killed during that attack? And there were two doctors who actually talked to them. They talked to them in Arabic. They were providing some aid to people, and they tried to talk to terrorists, but they were killed. Several of them were killed. One of them survived to tell the story, but many of them were killed. So this once again reinforces that this fight goes not only on the actual front lines, but in the worldviews between people. It's not only politics, it's ideology, it's the choice. It's the choice of for humanity right now. Which world are we going to live in? The old world, the old security system, it's gone. After the Second World War, security systems that were installed, they're gone. Westphal system was dismantled before that. What will be the new one? Nobody knows, but the main divide is already being defined. Freedom and creativity versus fear and control. And I think this will go through every family. This is, if you want to call it a global civil war. It's not a civil war in each country, it's a global civil war. United humanity is about at the crossroads to choose where they're going. One cannot say that because he's American, he's taking that position, or because he's Ukrainian, he's taking that position, or Russian takes that position. No, you cannot say that anymore. You need to actually look into each person's logic and understand, and values, and understand who takes which positions. Parliament Assembly of Europe also announced Putin to be a dictator. They acknowledged him as a dictator, and they said to recognize him as illegitimate at the end of this presidential term of Putin. Do you think that'll mean that they'll cease interacting with him? All countries will consider him as illegitimate, and do you think they'll expel those who will not recognize Putin as a dictator? No, I think it's an important step. It's an important step. They're trying to push their members of European Union to take active positions against or for Putin. This is a step in the bigger political game, because you can actually reference the formal resolution later in court, in other events. This is another good argument into that bucket. But this is not obligatory. And for example, in Slovakia, leading party, or in Hungary, they probably will not join that. And then it'll be a fight of arguments. Who will have better argumentation and who will be better competing in persuading people and the public opinion. But this is a strong message. Formal document adopted by the parliamentary organ of Europe. It's difficult to go around it. You can ignore it, but everybody will understand that you have a different position and that you are ignoring exactly that document. So it will not be adding to your points. And it also means that if you are not supportive of that decision, being inside free Europe, that means that you are weakening, right? You are weakening your position in Europe. And you are for dictators. And after a few steps like that, maybe there'll be 4 or 5 more steps like this, then there'll be a different question. Are you with the EU? Are you worthy of being in NATO? So this is a cumulative effect. 1, you can probably shrug off. 2, you can probably not look that way. 3 may cause certain anger. 4 will probably cause countries to think. 5 will likely bring them to the situation of when the straw breaks a camel's back. And they might start asking question, who are you with, guys? Whole Europe is on one side, and you guys are what, with Putin? Maybe you should then go ahead and join those guys. The other thing that it may take years for Europe to go there, but this process is happening. And not a single collective organization will allow its members to be actively breaking its strategy time and time again. And one thing when nothing is planned, but when plans appear and the members actually break these plans, then they'll start asking questions. Let's go to the Black Sea. Army of Russia is losing, or is expecting to lose, more warships there, and that is what causes Russia to be more active on that part of front. Black Sea Fleet of Russia actually is moving to Novorossiysk, further to the east. And after successful hits by Ukraine military on the Black Sea Fleet of Russia, British intel is saying that predominant part of that fleet was already moved, and Russia made a choice between losing their ships or having a chance to attack the grain corridor. What else do you think Russia has in the Black Sea? Because some people think that It can still take the initiative, but there is no risk, so as other opponents say. Well, Nikolai, Russia doesn't really have much resources there. Now that Ukraine has destroyed 2 more vessels, they started to think harder. Problem is for Russia that Novorossiysk is a freezing port. This is a very special place that basically, if you draw it in large swaths, this port freezes over in winter. There are winds blowing from Caucasus Mountains, and it's not the best location. Traditionally, Sevastopol was a better location for them because it was not a freezing one. Novorossiysk is very uncomfortable port because one morning they can wake up and they're stuck in ice and they cannot really maneuver, they cannot even run away, and they cannot fulfill any task. That's why they don't really want to go there, but they already moved a bunch. Now, what options do they have? In Crimea, we can reach them. Water drones showed to be effective. Now we have other drones that will get to them in underwater position. Those are even harder to work with. You cannot shoot them up with machine gun. That'll be a bigger problem, and that's a new generation of drones. It's already published in open media, so I'm not giving up any secrets. And the Black Sea basically has a traditional threat, self-drowning, and that's probably the best thing they can do in this case, right? So they're trying to find their future, but one of the probabilities is definite sinking, or being sunk by their own forces in order to not be given up to Ukraine. They cannot even block the grain deal properly because they'll be risking running into NATO vessels there: Bulgarian, Romanian, French, British, and there's also Turkey with its own opinion. So it becomes clear that it is really a big problem to break the grain deal or to intervene in that process. And it's makes it more difficult that NATO intel is monitoring the Black Sea 24/7. So they are facing a very uncomfortable alternative. Sevastopol naval base is constantly being hit. Novorossiysk is not usable in winter and spring. It's only usable somewhat 6 months out of 12. And they need to have an ability to maneuver. But there's always a risk that a drone will come. And the fact is that we destroyed several vessels that went there to fight drones. It just shows that it's a bad idea. Those vessels are not really fit to do that. And earlier attacks on the grain corridor in regards to the southwestern and western side of the sea, that can be foretold by intel measures, and likely allies or Ukrainian troops will figure a way to reach them. So it's a big question how Russia will deal with that matter. But the fact is that the Black Sea as operative unit of Russian military is falling deeper and deeper into defending itself, fighting for its own survival, than doing anything with the enemy. So that's a fact. We've done that with them. Thank God. Into the bucket of that logic, Alexey, just about an hour ago, we got a message that 6 Russian Navy ships left Sevastopol and went in direction of either Novorossiysk or Feodosia. Yeah, they have to withdraw them, but it's also a risky process, and we basically force them to defend and to flee. And this is good. This is awesome. We need to keep repeating that until all of them go down or go away. Well, listen, there was a message that something is being also signed with Abkhazia, right? Right, the naval base with Abkhazia, because that one would not be freezing. But that's a far away, right? This is further south than Sochi, and we even managed to reach Sochi today with UAVs. Yeah, it is far away, that's one. And two, this is technically a territory of Georgia, independent or whatnot, but it's still not an easy process to set up a naval base in a different country. And technically, it's a big issue to build a base that would be able to accept large vessels. one thing is to bring their smaller ones, but if you're talking about big ones, that will take a lot of infrastructure building. Right, that was my question, Alexey. How can they do it in terms of infrastructure? Yeah, they'll have to separate their fleet across several ports, and that's a whole other problem. Because one thing is to defend just one port and one center where you're united and combined. And the other is when you have to defend several spots. You have to provide air defense and other methods of defense, and you have to desaturate your capabilities. Sevastopol was that base was one of the most defended areas in so-called Russia and Russia occupied territories, right? Because Crimea is occupied territory. This was one of the most defended spots. The second one after Moscow. And even that one, Ukrainian forces managed to break through and to regularly attack. So imagine if we penetrated the most defended, the most well fortified area. Imagine what will happen with the other ports in Novorossiysk and other places in Abkhazia, wherever they put them. So it's a real problem for them. Today, there were several explosions, according to media, from Russian ports. They actually lost electricity and they noticed the attack of UAV on their targets. Yeah, Russians do not have UAVs that are that successful. They compensate that with their ballistic missiles. And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of missiles, but we're trying to somewhat bring the parity up with far-reaching UAVs, long-range UAVs. And this winter will be very different for Russians from the previous one, when we were just catching things on our head and we could not really defend ourselves by any means other than try to shoot down these missiles. So this winter will be different for Russia. And the destiny of the Black Sea, I would say it's not something to envy. So speaking of winter, President Zelensky is saying that the world understands what Russia is going to do in Ukraine again, and he is promising a strong response to the aggressor. I'm quoting him here that the world understands what Russia is preparing Ukraine and itself for this winter. We will be responding to force with force. And he said last week was the air defense week for Ukraine, and there'll be more launch sites and more defense systems coming online going into this winter. And what's most important, he said they reached a certain agreement with some countries that for winter, as I understood, will be borrowing some of the air defense systems. Yeah, I don't understand if it'll be a lease or rent or whatever, but we'll be adding a little more for winter time to cover the areas that are still difficult for us to cover right now in terms of protecting our energy system. If that would be realized, Nikolai, this will be a serious achievement. Because I know military history pretty well, but I don't quite remember any case of renting air defense systems. I think different things have happened at different times. Yuri, you're also a historian, right? Do you remember military ever gave something for rent to take back? For lease? If we manage to organize that, if our government manages to organize that, that'll be a big achievement. Ukraine is one of the biggest countries in Europe by territory. We have a ton of objects that we need to cover. And regardless, however many air defense systems we have, it won't be ever enough. Just for us to cover our territory well, if you use Patriots, we'd need at least 200 of them. And if we're talking about short-range, medium-range missiles, you can use something that's, as many as can be provided. But yeah, if there is a way to rent, I think it's an interesting trend, and it'll be fantastic if we do. I would add here, Alexey, that given the events that are happening in Israel, we can also find our own topic here and maybe bring up the matter of F-16s instead. So perhaps the West can give us volunteer pilots so we don't waste time training hours while we're training hours. Yeah, there was the same offer from Intel of Ukraine, from federal Intel agency said that if you want us, we can actually hit Iran if you give us enough means. if you do not want to go and fight Iran yourself, we have comms with Iran because they've been supplying Russia with arms. We can go there and hit them. Just help us, give us the means. We'll do it. And in this case, I agree. There's a lot of technologies and a lot of things going to be happening here. There are interesting things that 21st century is bringing to the table. I think we had volunteer pilots in the 20th century, but I'm sure we haven't seen the rent of military equipment, right? Right, renting missiles. All right, let's go to the map. In the Avdiivka direction, there is a number of attacks. During the last 24 hours, there are 43 military engagements. Our enemies made 2 missile, 37 aviation hits, dozens of artillery strikes. A lot of messages coming from Avdiivka. What can you comment on this? How threatening do you know these events are for us? How much of a threat this pincer movement is? Right, it's the right word, pincer. They're trying to connect them near Orlovka. They're attacking it from the north and from the south. They're trying to create small and large pincers. But Avdiivka is one of the most fortified regions for all the 10 years, almost 10 years of engagement. And it's very difficult to storm it, much more difficult than it was to storm Bakhmut. So we wish fortitude and luck of all our defenders in Avdiivka, because enemy has concentrated significant effort on it. I think they will not be able to succeed. It is very difficult for them to break through in that area, and we understand the significance of it. But they can play transferring troops and trying to make us send more reinforcements to that area. They learned from us, and they're trying to mimic that. Situation will not be easy, but Russian command, let's say, still has enough capacity to give us trouble. And this is to prove that there is more attack on Avdiivka, more attacks on Kupiansk area, and successful counterattacks where we are advancing near Bakhmut and near Tokmak direction. But in direction of Staromlinovka and Zavetное Желание, they actually stopped our motion at about Приютная. At some point, we were very successful there, and it was one of the prospective areas for us to break through. But yeah, they managed to concentrate enough reserves on the front to stop us. Here's the question about reserve: the speed of forming new ones, and how much more reserves are available, and who will use them how. But despite we continuing our motion here on Tokmak protrusion, and we need to understand, though, right now it's the question of hundreds of yards. It's not a serious breakthrough to Tokmak. You can see at the 7 o'clock on this map. It's about 16 or 17 miles to it. You need 10 brigades, or at least 5 extra brigades on that front. We don't know if they will be thrown into the fight here and which direction will be considered to be the most important. My opinion, you know that. We had 2 strategic mistakes. First, that we, for some reason, concentrated our effort on Bakhmut, first of all, when holding it in subpar situation, and then attempts to take it back when we don't really need that. It's operative tactical success at best, and we're wasting resources there. And they made us to expand our resources using our political infrastructure and using some mistakes of political leadership. It's not military leadership that was making these general decisions. They bought us for Bakhmut, that project, Bakhmut Fortress, as you note in the media. And the second strategic mistake is that we did not build our Surovikin line in those areas where we were not going to go ahead with offensive maneuvers. And even if we were going to on offensive, it would be nice to have a position to fall back to. On our territory, we could have continued fortification effort, and it would give our troops a way better shoulder to lean on, way better fortified positions to defend from, and then you could hold the line with smaller number of troops with lesser strain. And at fourth, we would have been even more successful in grinding down Russian troops, because our super motivated troops how difficult it is for them to go through that defense. Imagine how it would be for Russian troops to go through our defense lines, all these Z-storms and zombies, etc. This was not done. These are colossal mistakes that we made during the campaign of 2023. And now a question is how quickly and how soon we'll learn our lessons. You know, I'm skeptical. I published my statement today. I think our political leadership is at the level of its competence, and I don't think we should be relying on them to understand their mistakes and to be adequate in this. So I would not expect them to be that effective. Now, talking about the theater of war action, we had a question from one of our viewers. If you can bring them up, please. So about this railroad that we've discussed on Takmak direction, talking that it is a strategic task for Ukrainian troops to cut it and to create a huge logistics problem for Russian troops. People are wondering, why in this case don't we start attacking this railroad with HIMARS or with artillery or something? Because it's more difficult to get to this railroad. Well, first of all, yeah, we are attacking this road. We regularly, Volnovakha is the entry point to that whole railroad. And you understand, though, that Soviet Union, which actually is the only country that had its own railroad troops. So Russia still has some of that. In order to realistically cut the supply line, one needs very systemic effort. With the front line that size, it's difficult to bring HIMARS and other resources from the other parts of the front and dedicate it just here. And the size of railroad tracks is difficult. With the size they are, it's difficult to hit them. With HIMARS, it's probable, but it's nothing unfixable by repair troops. In Russia, they actually worked out the system how to rebuild it. In just a few hours, they can make it operational again. So the only reliable way to cut it is to actually occupy that railroad with our troops. And Takmak is also a big hub otherwise. Logistically, there's a lot of roads going through it, so auto transport is definitely another means, and it would make sense for us to capture it. So I don't know how many reserves we have. There's probably a secret information, and even if we knew, we wouldn't tell it out on air. But so far, I'm skeptical. We need more reserves thrown into that fight to achieve that goal. I'm thinking that even if we take Takmak and move south, it'll be from the category of miracles. For example, a miracle of proper planning and adequate leadership and implementation of operations. These miracles happen, but I would say that main guilt here is not on the shoulders of military organization, but on the shoulders of political organization of Ukraine. They are the ones who are defining priorities on the front. And according to the org structure, it is the president and his authority to approve deployment of certain troops in certain areas and using strategic reserves. And as for defense lines, that's definitely a federal program. That has to be a government decision. So here's another question, how our military leadership can work with our political leadership. We'll see how that works. There are some voices that are different from mine, skeptical. They're optimistic. They're saying we still have offensive potential and we have a few surprises. We'll see. I'm looking at what's happening. I'm rather skeptical. But even if we have advancing potential, I'm afraid we might use it the way we used others before. So still skeptical. Okay, other news related to inner political matters and religious matters. World Congress of Churches turned to Ukrainian parliament to consider once again about the law which they were trying to review and adopt about forbidding Russian Moscow Patriarchy on the territory of Ukraine or Russian Church in Ukraine. So the World Council of Churches sent a message that this is a bad story with adopting this law, that if that will be adopted in its current form with certain limitations, this will be used or can be used in a fashion that disrupts international norms. And I have a question in this regard. What is the World Council of Churches? What is that organization? Do we need to hear to listen to them? Well, there is Ukrainian Council of Churches, and then there is a World Council of Churches. It's real. It exists. We can look at it from the Stalin standpoint. How many tank divisions do they have, right? So if they don't have tank divisions, maybe they don't have any influence. However, one can also think that, well, this is a serious organization, and we might want to consider them. If we are treating religious questions seriously, this is a very serious organization. Now, the question is that 78% of Ukrainians consider them seriously religious. So, do these organizations need tank divisions to influence people's minds? I'm just asking a rhetorical question. My position, you know that, you can prosecute even the highest authorities of church if they violate certain criminal laws, but church should not be prosecuted as an institution, not a single church. And we still have a solution to not use force, methods of force on church. It just continue using criminal prosecution and catching those who misbehave, who work for Russia, who do other things. Because church is not only clerics, it's also parishioners, right? And according to different calculations, it's between 1.5 millions, or even up to 3 millions, according to some calculations. So let's say average 2. The question remains that the World Council of Churches actually makes the right statement, because there are different patriarchies, but the church itself is an undivisible body of religion, of Christianity. So regardless which one you're attacking here in Ukraine, you are attacking the whole Christianity. And by the way, there are a lot of believers in the United States, and they're also among those who define the politics of the United States and policies in regards to Ukraine. And even though everybody recognizes that Moscow Church is basically very often engaged in propaganda and other activities, one cannot prosecute that institute as a church, as an institute. That is very bad optics. So one would need to work. If you want to prosecute that or do something about it, you need to gather Ukrainian Council of Churches, not just Christian, it includes Judaism and Islam and others, and delegate and bring other patriarchies if we want to, Vatican and the others, and discuss it on the church level, what to do with Moscow Patriarchy in Ukraine. It should be a decision of churches. It should be reviewed canonically according to the law of church and tradition of church. And in this case, our government, our leadership could direct all questions to that canonical process and say, this is not a civil process, this is a religious process. And in this case, it would be a good ground for us to say we're not prosecuting church. We're only prosecuting certain criminals who violate certain laws of Ukraine. And it's the Council of Churches that figures out what to do with Russian church in Ukraine, Moscow church in Ukraine. And in this case, we would preserve religious peace, because that's the last thing we need to also fight there, and also reach our goals in terms of punishing the bad apples. But apparently our leadership went for a different way. We decided to swing hammer left and right, but we're putting ourselves in a difficult position. Direct analogy with Israel here, when, right, turn everything off, and water and electricity. We understand, of course, there are emotions because people are reacting to their heads being cut off, but a citizen can be enraged. Government should not be enraged. Country should not be enraged. Country should be logically working on the matters and finding best ways to resolve them. So government needs to work on, for example, in Israel case, how to make sure citizens and hostages remain safe, civilians remain safe, and the goal is to destroy Hamas with minimal damage to civilians and minimal collateral damage. Because the last thing you want is to have this optic that you don't care. And you can bring, like Israel can say that they will be strictly investigating all casualties, all civilian casualties, all reports of that, and go into reinforcement campaigns saying that we daily, for example, are telling civilians to move away from Gaza, from the areas that will be engaged in operation. that Israel will be providing camps, encampments for refugees. They'll be comfortable, there'll be water, electricity, there'll be medical aid. So that would be something that nobody could really attack Israel on. That you could see Israel is fighting Hamas here and providing for civilians here. But when it all entangles in a scary ball of pain where everything is mixed, this becomes a very difficult situation, and not a single government can afford such approach. And everybody knows how to treat Israel. I think there are very few friends, as strong friends as I am in the world, to Israel, but I'm the one also pointing at the difficulties they run into and the mistakes they make in different communications. Many of them are turning to me on an individual level, like Israeli representatives reaching out to me, discussing and looking at the experience I had in information resistance to Russia. And that's my message to them. Until you have time, make sure you separate Hamas from civilians. Even if you don't do that, in your mind, you need politically to separate them. You need logistically to separate them. Same thing we need to do with here in Ukraine, with church. One thing is prosecuting criminals, another is a church process, which should be separate from that. Because the moment we start talking about prosecuting Moscow Patriarchy as a church, that looks horrible everywhere, on all levels. First of all, United States, which also has a lot of populace, actively religious, active parishioners in churches, they do not want to see that. And in different parts of the world, all the Christians, they do not appreciate such a move. So until it's too late, we should stop. We should not prosecute the church. You can prosecute individuals, especially when they threaten national security or doing crimes. Otherwise, we should stay away from, and we should stay away as a government from prosecuting church. Two more topics, Alexey. Tomorrow, Poland will have parliamentary elections, and their results will be very important for Ukraine because Poland is our real strategic partner, critical strategic partner in terms of logistics, military aid that goes through Poland. So, how do you see these perspectives, our relations with Poland after their parliament elections? And I will announce here, I think on Monday, we'll have a stream with Vice Speaker of Polish Congress, Mikhail Kamiński. It'll be probably a very interesting stream, so come who you can at 7 p.m. on Monday. And second question, Zelensky's visit to Romania, because I think there were interesting statements, important statements made there. And it's great that Ukraine finally starting to pay attention to Romania after a Tri-Sea summit where you and I went. Right, we shouldn't be shy. We should say that, yeah, indeed, we were trying to break this dam, and I think we finally did. That Ukrainian-Romanian relations need to be bettered. So I think we can put a small tick for ourselves here. If so-called a left coalition wins, left-centric liberal coalition wins in Poland, then our relations will be better because they understand the value of trade and political relations. And they're not too concerned about the historic conflicts, historic issues. If peace will stay and they're very burdened by historic issues with the grain that we had recently and Volyn massacre and tragedy and historic experiences Poland and Ukraine had, this will still stay in our relations. But even if that continues, even if that party remains in power, I think the fact that they are staying in power, they will likely be more constructive because it will not be pre-election rhetoric. So elections will be somewhat defining for us. It's important. And a lot of things rest on these elections for Ukraine. And that stream where you guys are inviting Polish congressmen to comment on this on the 16th as a result of these elections, and we'll have certain initial data. It will be very important for us to take a deeper look. In my experience, Having met them in person, I want to say that we think we know everything about Poland. Not you and I, but Ukrainians in general. We don't know shit. We're mistaken about a lot of things. And same thing when people say that Poles know everything about Ukrainians, that's another mistake. The lack of systemic communication, seemingly neighborly, brotherly peoples, very well integrated, both Poles and Ukrainians in Poland. We have a very poor communication system, and it doesn't serve us well because we think that we know certain things that we don't, and we try to predict things based on our knowledge, which isn't. And time again, we step on the same rake. And if you listen to Polish side as well, when that party in power talks that Ukraine is cheating on Poland with Germany, that's a very false view on our motivation. So unfortunately, some people still think that as a reality and make public statements to that effect. So systemic communication is super important for us. Western civilization stands on two processes if you go up. It's cooperation and communication. We're critically dependent on cooperation with Poland, and Poland depends upon cooperation with us. And you know my concept about two fangs, it's Poland and Ukraine. Together, they create an eastern wall that will not let Russia threaten Europe, because 250,000 of Polish troops and 250,000 of Ukrainian troops, well trained in peace times, this is 500,000 important troops that not a single mobilized army from Russia can go through easily. It's impossible. And that means the United States has open hands to deal with Asia, Southeast Asia, and Europe is well protected, and Europe knows that it is well protected. The whole West should be interested in a very good alliance with Ukraine and making sure Ukraine and Poland are good friends. But nobody is thinking about that. We still have to prove that. We have to explain that to you and bring that message of that two-fang concept. It actually brings enlightenment and the fire in the eyes of Polish politicians when you explain it to them. But it seems so obvious for us, right? And yeah, we don't, apparently. We still need to communicate. We still need to stay in touch and talk more and more and establish something systemic. So we're trying and doing it to make it better. For now, it's public diplomacy, right, on our level, but I hope one day it will be government diplomacy as well. Well, so we hope. Thank you for that stream, gentlemen. We've been for almost an hour live till Monday, right? We'll see you on Monday. Please do not forget to click the like button. That feels nice for us and it's good for the channel. Do not forget to subscribe to Alexey Arestovych, Yuriy Romanenko, Alpha&Omega, and Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English. Thank you so much.